Okay, let's talk some more about the anatomy of the urinary system. We have two kidneys, right and left kidneys, two ureters, a bladder, and the urethra. What we're seeing here is a frontal section. We've sliced off the anterior portion of all of these structures. The urethra is the route by which urine leaves the body, specifically leaves the bladder. Urine is produced in the kidneys, transported to the bladder via the ureters. And one thing I want to point out is that the kidneys reside in an area known as the retroperitoneal space. What I want to point out here is that this red line right here is the parietal peritoneum. It's the outermost of the serous membranes. This is the vertebral column right here. This is anterior. This would be roughly the belly button. The kidneys, which I'm not sure which of these structures are supposed to be the kidneys, but the kidneys reside in the retroperitoneal space. They are not covered by serous membranes. Looking at the kidney itself, this is another frontal section. This is a ureter leaving the kidney. Most everything that we see in maroon right here represents the renal cortex. Everything else is the renal medulla. These blue and orange structures are the renal pyramids. Between the pyramids, here, 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 and here, and right here and here, are the renal columns. And I would say the renal columns are in the renal medulla as well. Once again, when we use the word cortex, we're talking about the periphery of an organ. And when we talk about the medulla, we're talking about the interior. So I would say the medulla is confined within this line right here. Outside of that line would represent the renal cortex. These orange structures represent collecting ducts. Remember, collecting ducts accumulate filtrate that is passed along the nephron. And that filtrate, once it leaves the collecting duct and dumps into this yellow region, we now refer to that as urine. This yellow region right here are the calyces, the minor calyces, and the major calyces. For our purposes, I just want you to understand the term calyces is where urine collects when it leaves the collecting duct within the renal medulla. And from the calyces, that urine then proceeds into the ureter. We looked at this image before. It was a different image, but same idea. This in white is the nephron, Bowman's capsule, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct. Within Bowman's capsule, we find the glomerulus, which is a capillary bed. So we have the afferent arteriole bringing blood to the glomerulus and the efferent arteriole taking blood away. One thing I want to point out is that the kidneys, there's roughly 1 million nephrons per kidney. If we have two kidneys, that would be 2 million nephrons in our body. That over the course of 24 hours filters 180 liters of blood plasma. Keep in mind, our body contains only about 3 liters of blood plasma, which means that 3 liters is filtered 60 times per day. 180 liters is filtered, but generally speaking, we only produce about 1.5 liters of urine every day, which means roughly 99% of that filtrate, 99% of the blood plasma that moves into Bowman's capsule is going to be reabsorbed back into the peritubular capillary. Once again, 99% of that filtrate ends up getting put back or reabsorbed into our bloodstream directly into the peritubular capillary. Right here is another image of the nephron. The great majority of the nephron from the proximal convoluted tubule all the way down to the collecting duct is composed or lined with simple cuboidal epithelial tissue. So in white here would be the lumen. If we look back here, this green line would represent simple cuboidal epithelial tissue. Whereas in Bowman's capsule, that's characterized by simple squamous epithelial tissue. So one thing I've been remiss to actually mention yet is the overall functions of the urinary system. The urinary system, as we've just talked about, filters blood. It maintains osmolarity. And what that means for us, it maintains a suitable quantity or concentration of ions and solutes within our blood, which is really important for maintaining blood pressure. The kidneys also release hormones. The kidneys release EPO, which is erythropoietin. That is a hormone that stimulates the synthesis of more red blood cells, otherwise known as erythrocytes. The kidneys also release renin, which is released during times of low blood pressure. It helps synthesizes calcitriol, otherwise known as vitamin D3, which we talked about earlier when we were talking about the integumentary system. And that is where the synthesis of vitamin D3 is initiated, but it's completed in the kidneys. And it's also a site of gluconeogenesis, which is producing glucose from non-carbohydrate precursors, such as amino acids in this case. Now, what gets filtered at the glomerulus? Everything in the blood, but the formed elements, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets, and the plasma proteins. Everything else in the blood gets filtered. Water, ions, hormones, waste products like urea, uric acid, glucose gets filtered, amino acids get filtered, ions get filtered, everything but those blood cells or formed elements and plasma proteins. What I want to do for the remainder of this lecture is talk about the circulation of blood to, through, and from the kidneys. That is, providing blood to the nephrons to get filtered and then taking that blood back to the general circulation. So what we see right here is a renal artery, which would be coming from the abdominal aorta. The renal arteries are going to divide into segmental arteries, going to different segments or regions. When they pass up the renal columns, these are known as interlobar arteries. Interlobar arteries. And as these arteries proceed to form an arch around the pyramids, we call these the arcuate arteries. Arcuate arteries. And then coming off, radiating into the cortex, are the cortical radiate arteries. And then coming off the cortical radiate arteries here and all those other cortical radiate arteries are the afferent arterioles. Afferent arterioles. So let's take another look at this. Here is that kidney with the blood flow. We have the renal artery, which in this image is number 1. That's going to give rise to the segmental arteries, which we see in 2. Then we have the interlobar arteries, which are labeled 3. Arcuate arteries, I guess they're labeled number 4. So the arcuate arteries are number 4. And then we have the cortical radiate arteries, which we see in 5. Coming off the cortical radiate arteries, once again, if we look at this cortical radiate arteries, it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 glomeruli coming off the cortical radiate arteries. From the cortical radiate arteries, like I just said, it moves into the afferent arteriole, which provides blood to the glomerulus. From the glomerulus, the blood proceeds into the efferent arteriole, and then that turns into the peritubular capillary. At this point, the blood needs to return to the inferior vena cava, and it does so in the following fashion. From the peritubular capillary, the blood moves into the cortical radiate vein, then to the arcuate vein, interlobar vein, the segmental vein, and the renal vein. Like everywhere in the body, if we have arteries, we have the corresponding veins. And then from the renal vein, it drops the blood back into the inferior vena cava, which proceeds up to the heart.